Hi, guys, it's WENGIE. Welcome to the first episode of my podcast, Let's Figure It Out. This podcast is about basically trying to figure out life and knowing that this is a process of constant learning and kind of also knowing that we may never get to the point where we figured things out. Like, I'm almost 40, I still haven't figured things out. So, I'm not even sure we're ever going to get to that point, but that doesn't stop us from trying and also figuring out who we are as a person. I feel like being a daughter of immigrant parents that grew up in a country that basically didn't feel welcoming of my race, especially when I was young. It's a little bit different now. And then constantly having to change myself to fit in and receive love. A lot of my journey in the past couple years has kind of been going back and trying to figure out who I really am, because I realized that I spent the majority of my life masking, pretending to be someone else so I could fit in, receive love, be popular, whatever my goal was at the time, depending on my stage of life. I just realized that I stopped thinking for myself. I actually didn't have the ability to think for myself and know what I want and know who I am. And that sounds really strange. It feels like this is the kind of thing that you were born with. And honestly, I think we were born with it. I was definitely born with it, but I feel like social conditioning and my environment and my relationships trained me out of being in touch with my true self and knowing and being firm with the decisions that I want for myself. I feel like this is kind of like a life journey and learning for me because one, I grew up with immigrant Asian parents. And for those of you guys that have being in an immigrant Asian household, you'll kind of know what the vibe is. It's different to growing up in a country of your origin, because in that case, you feel like you fit in your community because you look like everyone else and you have the same culture as everyone else. But being an immigrant, you get thrown into this reality of not fitting in at all. Your parents don't fit in. Your parents can barely even speak the language of the country. They're just trying to survive. They're in scarcity mode. They're in fear. They just want to make sure that you can survive. And there's so much of this scarcity, pressure, and fear that you kind of grow up with, not knowing that that's what it was, because I was literally a child. On top of that, you don't feel like you fit into any of your schools or friendships unless you're surrounded by people of the same ethnicity as you, which I eventually found in high school. But in primary school, like, my food was different to everyone else's. I remember the first time I brought like my dumplings into class for lunch, and you open the box and everyone's like, ew, what's that smell? Because everyone's eating sandwiches. And people at that time did not embrace Asian food in Australia. So it was kind of like, what is that weird chive smell? And it was really strong. And then you feel really alienated. You feel like you don't belong. And so from a very young age, you just learn to pretend to be someone else so you can just fit in with people around you. You also have this like subconscious feeling that people don't want to include you, or I think there's just this inbuilt racism that a lot of people don't address that exists, but people just say like, I'm not racist. But like, as an Asian growing up in, a mainly Caucasian society for the majority of my life, I do feel this subconscious racism, and I'm sure they're not doing it with intention or purpose, but being on the other side of it, you feel it. So you quickly learn to stop listening to what you want, and it becomes again this survival kind of thing where you're like, okay, now I have to be like this so I can basically socially survive. The irony of that, after I basically had to mask my way through adolescence. I did have a professional career for a point in time. I became an accountant. I did accounting for Johnson and Johnson, which is a large corporate company. And then I fell into working for a digital marketing agency as a social media consultant, which obviously naturally led to me working in social media. The irony of social media as well, and maybe this is also why I was really good at being a YouTuber, is basically to survive and succeed as a social media content creator, you are at the helm of the algorithms. The more you can quickly chase trends, adapt to them, adapt yourself to the changing algorithms and needs of the algorithms, the better you do as a content creator in terms of pure numbers. So it's funny because I think my whole entire early life of masking and trying to fit in basically trained me to be a really good content creator because I could also mask and fit in really, really well. To the social algorithms, what was trending at the time, what people liked, etc., etc. I guess the effect of this whole experience is that I never really had to learn to think for myself. It was all external motivators. It was all me chasing what people wanted of me, what would people please. In the end, I realized I was a heavy people pleaser because that's how I got what I wanted. But over the long term, that does a number on you psychologically because you realize you don't know who you are. You've lived for other people or social expectations and external motivators your whole life. The thing is, you now want to start living your own life, which is what I started feeling maybe like 5 years ago. Really felt like the need to rebel against that career that I wanted for so long. Like, that was actually my dream. But, 5 years ago, I was like, is this really my dream? Is this really what I want? Actually, I'm kind of burnt out and I want to try and do something else. But I think that's because I just felt like not all of it was my choice. And because I've lived most of my life pleasing others, listening to others, that I realized I wanted something for myself. The irony of doing that your whole life is like you don't actually know what you want yourself either. So it's not like I had this clear idea of like, okay, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is where I'm going. It was like now I actually need to go through a journey of figuring out who I am. Now it became like, okay, how do I learn this skill of knowing who I am, thinking for myself and making decisions where I can be firm on what I want. I'm still figuring it out right now. This is why this podcast I think is going to be a really good journey for me as well because I am in this process. So if you're kind of in this process, join along and figure it out with me. The other thing I want to touch on is having Asian immigrant parents. I'm not sure if this is like the Asian experience. I think it kind of is, but I can't speak to that because that's not my experience. But being an Asian immigrant child, I had a lot of pressure to do what my parents wanted. Like there was never like, oh, have any career you want, do whatever you want in life. It was really much like you're doing extra homework right now, you're going to tutoring, you're going to try and get into this school, and you're going to get a stable paying corporate job in this profession because this is what we want for you. And it's all done out of love. And also it's all done out of sacrifice because you grew up watching your parents sacrifice a lot of their lives to give you this better life, quote unquote better life. That's what they've given to you. So now you feel really indebted to really do what they want you to do so that you can pay them back because you kind of feel like this need to kind of reciprocate as a child. Like you love your parents, so you want to reciprocate. So that's how I felt. So I did accounting. This is not my first choice. I was really not good at accounting. I am really bad with attention to detail, but it's all my parents ever wanted for me. And I was thinking, okay, so they want this out of love. They want the best for me. So I'm gonna do this. So I got into the OC class, which is like a gifted class. I spent a lot of my Sundays in tutoring. So instead of playing like a normal child, I was in tutoring doing like 4 hours of intense study on Sundays on top of school to get into this gifted class, which led me to this gifted high school. It's called selective school in Australia, which you need to take an exam to get in. And this gives you like the best chance to get a good university entrance exam score. So I spent a lot of time tutoring to get into this selective high school. Once I got into selective high school, my parents wanted me to get a scholarship so that they don't have the financial burden and I don't have the financial burden, because they weren't going to pay for my university. I was. So I could have some money to pay for my uni fees. Of course, uni was not a choice. It was like I just knew I had to do university. I did that. I got my scholarship into university in accounting. And then I did 4 years of accounting school and then worked 4 years in accounting. And I really felt like it wasn't me. I was doing this purely out of love for my parents and purely to make them feel safe. I realized that a lot of this comes from fear and scarcity because they moved to a new country where they didn't know the language. All they wanted for me is to be safe. But the thing is, giving me a life in this country means that they gave me safety already. And this was an opportunity for me to then have the freedom and foundation to be able to do what I wanted. But because they were in this scarcity mindset, it was projected onto me. And now I lived in this scarcity mindset. So I went and did accounting. I was not very good at it. If I had stuck to accounting, I would just be a very average to under average performing adult, and it would have crushed my confidence and it would not have made me happy. By the end of like when I really wanted to quit accounting, I was around 24. I was having a quarter life crisis actually, because I knew deep down this is not what I wanted to do. This was me people pleasing, trying to make my parents happy. This was not my choice. I actually wanted to either be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, which I realized you needed to get a med degree for, which my marks weren't good enough for that. So I guess that was off the table, but at least a psychologist or a graphic designer. And I really loved hairdressing, even though that was not an option if you're an Asian kid to become a hairdresser. Good luck with trying to convince your parents. So there were a lot of things I wanted to do, which was not accounting. And every time I voiced what I wanted, it was basically squashed down. It was like, you're not going to find a job, you're going to have a horrible existence, you're going to be homeless. There were so many threats thrown at me every time I voiced what I wanted. And so that became my life. That became a habit where I'm like, okay, this is what I want. No, that's really bad for you. So I guess like subconsciously, it kind of got me into this point where I felt like, okay, whatever I wanted is actually bad. Whatever they want is good. And because this was done to me at a very young age, I guess it became kind of like subconscious programming. And I'm sure we all have versions of this ourselves. It might not be for you exactly like about your career. It could be about a behavior or how you act or something. But I feel like society does this to us where it's like we might have some very natural innate desires and excitements, and then everything around us is telling us this is bad, this is not good, you should change your mind about this, you should do this instead. And if that message is given to you at such a young age, it for sure affects how you act. And for sure, people that are susceptible to this, because for me, I thought pleasing my parents and doing what they wanted me to do is what I needed to receive love, because they never gave me what I thought love was unless I impressed them with something that they wanted me to do. Whether this was good grades, whether this was behaving well, I was kind of just fed like, we'll only be happy with you if you act a certain way and if you do certain things. And because I grew up with that, it just became like this subconscious thing to make people love me and to make people care about me and look favorably upon me. I have to act in the way that they want me to act rather than in the way that I wanted to act. So I became a people pleaser. And I'm sure a lot of you guys that are like nodding and agreeing with this probably have some kind of deep, fear of not being loved for being yourself, because you've just been taught that the only way to receive love is to do what other people wanted. I only received positive feedback and, compliments and stuff when I did things that they wanted. I realized that there was very few times where I was just being myself and they were like, hey, here's some compliments and here's some love. And I guess it's not totally their fault because they grew up in a culture where that was done to them. It's always a cycle. Like your parents will pass down what they received, even though they didn't like it, they will just do it unconsciously until at which point they decide to have time to self-reflect. Like I have time now to self-reflect, decide that it's not the behavior that they want to perpetuate onto their kids. And unfortunately, in this life, and I will sit down and say, I am so blessed to have this opportunity just because I have financial freedom. I have done enough in my life and achieved enough that I have the financial freedom and have the time to sit here and think about all these things and learn about all these things about myself. My parents never had that time. They came to Australia. My dad came to Australia in his mid 30s. So he was around my age when he had to start again in a new country that he didn't speak the language of. Had a kid and family to look after. My mom as well started working in a country where she didn't know language of, you know, maybe in her 30s. So it's like I get it. Like I don't blame them for doing this because it's my cat. I don't blame them for doing this because I think in order to sit down and reflect and have this knowledge, one, they didn't have the internet, so they couldn't really gain knowledge from other people that had time to sit down and do this. So we're very blessed to have the internet and this information sharing knowledge. So like I can share with you guys what I learned by sitting with myself for the past 3 years. But a lot of people are basically just trying to survive. So you don't have time to go through all this self-development, self-reflection when you're just trying to pay your bills, get to work, you're exhausted, you're just trying to feed your family, feed yourself, maybe even exercise. Some people don't even have time to exercise, maybe do some hobbies, relax. So I get it. Like we don't all have the privilege to sit here and learn to figure it out, which is why this podcast I think is really important to me because I want to share this knowledge of what I've learned to you guys that may not have time to sit down and self-reflect. Maybe some of the questions I bring up, some of the stories I tell might spark something in you that you might not have had the time to figure out yourself. But because you're listening to this podcast, you're like, actually, maybe I'll think about it. Was this a pattern that, I had growing up? Is this something I want to look at? You don't necessarily have to look at it, but if you do, like, here's the opportunity. I'm here to tell stories of my experiences and what I'm learning so that you guys can benefit. So yeah, my parents kind of perpetuated the cycle. My mom had a really strict father as well that had a really strict schedule because he wanted her to be successful. My dad actually was a little bit different and he wasn't as harsh on me growing up because I think he also had a lot of freedom to decide his own life growing up. So in that case, he was actually pretty open with me doing what I wanted to do, but my mother really wanted me to do certain things because she wanted me to be safe and stable and not have to be in this constant fear of scarcity and survival. But yeah, I think that I had glimpses growing up of what I wanted and what I authentically wanted to decide for myself. Like I did have some sense of that. And when I was really young, I did really chase a lot of my passions. A lot of it was in arts. I really loved drawing, painting, singing, and piano. So I really loved the arts growing up, but I really had to put that in the back burner as I grew up because it was quote unquote not practical. And I guess it's true now that I'm an adult and I look in society and how the arts are shown, I realize that a lot of children growing up that are able to indulge in artistic endeavors come from maybe not necessarily a wealthy family, but a family comfortable enough to have disposable income to one, pay for these art classes, which is really expensive, by the way. Like creative lessons are one of the most expensive lessons you can pay. It was almost more expensive than my educational tutoring. And for families that are, just barely making it, it is not a good value proposition to pay for piano when you can pay for maths and science and have your kids get a good grade and find a good job. So I get it. Like, practically speaking, I get it. And maybe it was meant to be that I wasn't able to indulge in the arts, because it gave me that fire to indulge in creativity a lot more when I was older. And I knew instead of it being given to me, I had to go fight and chase it myself, which led to my career in YouTube, because that was partly me wanting to be creative. Content creating was a very huge creative outlet for me. As I grew up, I loved writing. So I used to have a blog on Zanga, Friendster, Zanger, and then of course Blogger was like kind of like the launching pad for me. But I had always made websites and created like digital content myself. I used to draw pictures, scan them, and color them on Photoshop, and then post them on a website for my friends to see. It wasn't even for anything in particular. I just enjoyed doing it. That was a huge creative outlet for me, and I think that gave me a huge foundation for becoming a content creator. I didn't even know that I was doing that, but it was just like a natural thing in my life. So there were glimpses of me in my life, but I always felt guilty of indulging in those kind of things. I felt like I was wasting time. I felt like I wasn't being productive. I felt like I wasn't building my future by doing those things. I was taking time for myself and enjoying myself. And I think that's something also very, very kind of unique to the immigrant experience, because I think when your parents are constantly in survival mode and they're just trying to make ends meet, they don't have time to indulge in their desires. They don't have time to relax and do things that they want. So when they see you doing it, they make you feel guilty for doing it because they didn't get to. And that's not something I saw as a kid. But now when I look back and I think about my parents, I'm like an adult now. I'm like around their age when I was a kid. I can see myself doing that as well if I was in this fear, scarcity, survival mode. I would be like, well, I don't have time for myself. I'm too busy trying to make ends meet and feed you and make sure that you have what you need, at least the basics. Why do you get to have fun? And I think this comes at a cutoff. I think this isn't the case for when you're actually a child. I think parents get when you're a child that you get to be a child. So I think I was able to indulge in what I wanted to do as long as I did the other work, which was extra homework and tutoring on the weekends. As long as I did that, I got to play. So it still always had like some sort of strings attached to it, like my play and my just what they call wasting time came at a cost, which was to do the productive things first. But there was definitely a switch when I became a little bit older, especially when I was before exam times or like critical parts of my life, where I was definitely guilt tripped for enjoying myself. If I wasn't studying, if I didn't have my head down in a book, if I wasn't at the library, like I was doing something wrong. And I felt that, like, I felt like, oh my God, it almost made it hard to enjoy myself. And it got to the point where I felt so suffocated that I would even just rebel. Like, I would just go do what I wanted and be like, there was like no middle ground for me because I either felt so guilty or I would snap back the other way and then do the complete opposite and not care at all about doing the productive things. And that's not very healthy. I think the healthy part is the middle ground where, you know, you enjoy yourself, but you also do what you want. And there's no heavy feelings attached to either. Like, if you feel guilty while taking time off, which I have felt my whole life until recently, like, you don't really enjoy taking time off. Like, it doesn't really make you relax. It doesn't give you the benefits that you intended to get from it when you're like, oh, I want to go relax. If you spent the whole time relaxing but feeling guilty and anxious, like, you feel just as tired afterwards. So in the end, it was a very unhealthy pattern because, like, you never got a break. Even when you're trying to take a break, you were feeling guilty for taking the break. And now I'm thinking about it, it's so ironic. But yeah, that was like my experience for doing things that I wanted, to play, to enjoy myself. It was just, I just felt so guilty. And then when my parents stopped imposing that on me, I did that to myself, especially after I got successful with YouTube and it became my business and my goals and what I wanted to do, I would definitely guilt trip myself if I wasn't working. I overworked so much, and I think that's partly why I was so successful. I was successful because of this chip on my shoulder that like I literally couldn't let myself enjoy my I couldn't have free time off. Like I felt bad about it. So, when I started doing YouTube, like I did not rest. And I could share this story of my YouTube journey some other time because it's going to take a long time. It's probably its own episode. So let me know down below if you want that story of how I started and things like that. And also, like, as a listener, please put questions down below of questions you want me to answer. Eventually, I want this to be a very interactive podcast because I feel like this next part of my life is not going to be like, it's going to be about me, of course, because I am in this journey of figuring myself out. But I realize what I want myself is to help people figure themselves out. I just want to share my knowledge and help people. And that's something I've always wanted to do from the very beginning of this YouTube career. Before I started chasing numbers and subscribers and attention, and I honestly never wanted to be famous or have attention, but I realized that to get paid or to be a certain amount of successful, I will need to get that attention. But being famous was not my number one goal. My number one goal was actually to quit my job and pay myself full time from a creative endeavor that I enjoyed. And I did do that. I did that very, very well. So that was like my goal. And because I've been blessed enough to have done that, I now want this next stage of my content creation career to be community first, help people first, and also me first. And I don't want to feel like I'm making content because of the algorithm. I want it to be, it's something I want to make, and also it's something that's going to help you guys. And I think if those two can align, that's going to make me feel so fulfilled, and it's going to like tick that box of like, I'm doing something for myself now. But I always have to put myself first. So I also don't want this podcast to be like, hey, I'm dropping it one every week until I want to. Right now, I think I'm just going to be posting an episode whenever I feel like I have something to share. Or if you guys ask a question I really want to answer, or I feel like I can actually add value to. This leads me to this final section of this podcast where I really want to share this proverb. And this proverb has made a huge difference in my life. It is a clue to figuring it out. This is an old Chinese proverb about a Chinese farmer. I don't remember where I saw it, but I can see here from my research that Alan Watts has mentioned it. But I'm going to tell you this Chinese proverb, the Chinese farmer story it's called. I just call it the Chinese farmer proverb story. I don't know. It really encapsulates one hidden truth of life that took me a very long time to figure out. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. That evening, all of his neighbors came around to commiserate. They said, "We're so sorry to hear your horse has run away. This is most unfortunate." The farmer said, maybe. The next day, the horse came back bringing 7 wild horses with it. And in the evening, everybody came back and said, "Oh, isn't that lucky? What a great turn of events. You now have 8 horses." The farmer again just said, "Maybe." The following day, his son tried to break one of the horses, and while riding it, he was thrown and broke his leg. The neighbors then said, "Oh, dear, that's too bad." And the farmer responded, "Maybe." The next day, the conscription officers came around to conscript people into the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. Again, all the neighbors came around and said, "Isn't that great?" Again, he said, "Maybe." But yeah, nothing is ever totally good or totally bad. And so this whole paradigm of thinking things are good and bad, which I grew up with, I think it's something very natural to humans to think things that are good or bad because we have this need to categorize. But that proverb always reminds me that that's not the case all the time. And just be patient and wait and have faith. And I think that's something I'm learning these days is to just have faith and not being constant of like, I need a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G to Z. Like that has been my whole existence. I've always had to have like a plan B, C, D, E, F. And like, I think that's because I have very little faith in the future for myself to just let go. That's something I'm working on. That's something I'm trying to figure out. That's all I wanted to share for my first episode of Let's Figure It Out. Again, I'm not promising when the next episode is coming, but I would like you guys to leave comments down below on topics that you want me to discuss, or tell stories of yours. I would love to hear that and hear stories of your experiences, your learnings, your journeys. Maybe that will inspire me. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know I haven't dropped something for a long time. I hope this is a good drop. I wanted it to be a good drop. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Love you, and I'll see you guys next time.